For the very beginning of my homily today, I want you to use your imagination. And I just want you to imagine for a moment you are walking outside the city gates of Rome to a little church called Domine Quo Vadis. The church is built on the spot where tradition tells us that Peter, fleeing the Roman persecutions, meets Christ, who is heading in the opposite direction toward Rome. And in your mind's eye, just imagine Peter, upon seeing Christ, falling to the ground on his knees. His arms are stretched out towards the Lord. This aged, broken man who had just witnessed the martyr of thousands of Christians, sobbing in despair, asking, Quo vadis, Domine, quo vadis, Domine. In Latin, where are you going, Lord? Where are you going? To which Christ responds, if you desert my people, I'm going to Rome to be crucified a second time. And can you just imagine Peter lying on the ground for a long time, his face covered with dust, and finally rising, seizing his staff, and then heading towards Rome with a resolute face, with joy and in peace, having seen Christ. You know, I'm convinced that Christ turning Peter back on the road that day was the beginning of God's victory over that pagan city. Ancient Rome has passed, but 2,000 years later, the Basilica of St. Peter still stands. Today we are confronted with the parable of the two sons asked to work in the vineyard. One of the sons hesitates and at first tells his father he will not, but then afterwards changes his mind and goes into the vineyard. The other son, he lies. He says he will do it, but he did not go to the vineyard. Just think about it. Amid the Roman persecutions, Peter hesitated like that first son, didn't he? And who wouldn't? He knew what would eventually happen to him if he returned to Rome. But in returning to Rome and planting the seeds of the faith in God's vineyard, Peter achieved a great victory for Christ. In our gospel, Jesus asked the priests and the elders, which of the two sons did the Father's will? They answered, the first. And while that may be true, neither one of the sons is a great model to follow. Sometimes, like Peter and that first son, we hesitate to do what is right in our faith lives, especially if it's difficult. Or at times, we pledge to do the right thing, but we fail to follow through, like that second son. But just like Peter and those two sons in our gospel, God is inviting us, you and me, to go out into the vineyards of this world. And the vineyards, they need workers. They need you and me. The fields need to be harvested for Christ. How are we to do this in a world that is struggling, suffering, and divided? St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, provides the key and the guidepost to overcome our hesitancy and to give us the courage by imploring us to have the same attitude as Christ. Other translations of the same passage, I like better use the term putting on the mind of Christ. Christ reached out to the tax collectors, the marginalized, the disabled, the poor, in love and mercy. Christ who, despite being God, came to us in human appearance, just like you and me, as a model for us of service, sacrifice, and humility for each one of us to follow. Christ is not just the foundation of a Christian life, but the ultimate example of what it means to be Christian in both words and deeds. The word Christian in Greek means to be a little Christ. The great Korean martyr, St. Andrew Kim, once said, "It is an honor to be a Christian, not just in name, but in fact." And I think that is Paul's message to us today. To be Christians, to be a little Christ, in fact, is to have the same mind as Christ in caring for others in love and in mercy. We don't live in isolation. We are all in this world that can be one of suffering and difficulty, but it can be tamed by the love and mercy of Christ. This is why I believe Peter summoned the courage to go back and return to Rome. You and I live in a world vastly different than 2,000 years ago. But the need for workers in the vineyards remains great, including right here at St. Elizabeth's Church. Every baptized Christian is a co-sharer in Christ's ministry as a little Christ by participating fully, actively, and consciously in the salvation and the good for all. Our actions within the context of our God-given gifts and abilities defines our faith, just like it defined Peter's. In October, we will be holding a ministry fair, and many of our ministries are in desperate need of more volunteers. And so we invite you to take the time to visit the ministry fair and consider what ministry God might be inviting you to consider. It's never too late to respond to God's invitation. May our encounter with Christ in the Eucharist today provide us the same courage as it did Peter 2,000 years ago. The field is vast. The work, yes, it's hard. But if we put on the mind of Christ, pick up our staff, and walk towards those in need, the harvest will be bountiful. God bless you.